Have you ever wondered what the smartest people you know are reading right now? Not the flashy books they post on Instagram, not the business bestsellers on coffee tables, but the hidden gems they quietly devour when no one's watching. The truth is, brilliance doesn't always come from what's trending, it comes from what's timeless, overlooked, and deeply challenging. Stay with me, because this story will take you inside the private libraries of thinkers, creators, and leaders who have built their minds in silence. And before we dive deep, hit subscribe now, because stories like this aren't just worth reading, they're worth living. The smartest people I know never brag about their reading lists. They don't casually drop the names of books into conversations to look impressive, and they don't treat reading as a performance to be displayed. Instead, they read quietly, methodically, and with an intention that feels almost sacred. Their bookshelves are not curated for show, they're curated for survival, growth, and deep transformation. Over the years, I've watched these people closely, friends, mentors, colleagues, and even strangers whose habits revealed something extraordinary. And one truth became undeniable: their secret weapon was not what they knew, but what they read in silence when nobody else was paying attention. At first, I thought intelligence came from speed. I believed that reading dozens of books a year would make me wise, that consuming information at a rapid pace was the same as absorbing it. But when I compared myself with those quiet readers, I noticed a difference. They didn't finish more books than me. In fact, many of them read fewer. But what they did differently was this: they dug deeper into each page, pulled threads between unrelated subjects, and reread the same passages until the meaning became part of them. One of the smartest people I know, a retired engineer in his late 60s, has a shelf dedicated entirely to books he's read at least 10 times. Most people would call that boring. He calls it practice. When I asked him why he rereads so obsessively, he said something I'll never forget: books don't change, but you do. When you revisit them, you meet yourself again, and that's the real lesson. That hit me like a thunderbolt. I started looking closer at what he and others were quietly reading. Their choices weren't random, nor were they influenced by bestseller lists. Instead, they followed a pattern designed to sharpen the mind, strengthen the spirit, and deepen their understanding of the world. And while the books themselves varied wildly, from dense philosophy to science fiction, from ancient wisdom to modern psychology, the purpose behind them was the same: to think differently. Philosophy is often the cornerstone of their quiet reading. Not because they want to quote Plato at parties, but because philosophy teaches how to think, not what to think. I remember a close friend, a successful entrepreneur, telling me that he carried Marcus Aurelius' Meditations everywhere he went. When I asked him why, he said, "Because leadership isn't about making decisions when things are easy, it's about staying calm when everything falls apart." Marcus reminds me of that. That wasn't just reading for pleasure, that was reading for resilience. History is another favorite, but not in the way most of us learned it in school, memorizing dates and battles. The smartest readers I know approach history as a map of human patterns. They don't read history to know what happened, they read history to understand what always happens. One woman I know, a brilliant strategist, often pulls lessons from Thucydides' account of the Peloponnesian War to explain modern politics and business rivalries. She doesn't treat history as dead facts but as living lessons. Psychology plays a massive role too. Quiet readers understand that if you can't master yourself, you can't master anything. They dive into books about human behavior, not to manipulate others but to understand them, and themselves, at a deeper level. I once noticed a colleague flipping through an old, yellowed copy of Carl Jung's essays. When I asked why he wasn't reading something newer, he smiled. Because people don't change as much as we think. Jung still explains fears, desires, and dreams better than most modern writers. But here's the twist that surprised me most: the smartest people don't just read nonfiction. They read fiction, lots of it. Some of the most intelligent people I know swear by novels. Why? Because fiction builds empathy. It teaches you to step into lives you'll never live and struggles you'll never face. A scientist friend once told me that reading Dostoevsky helped him understand human contradictions better than any psychology textbook. A lawyer I know insists that reading Toni Morrison taught her more about justice, suffering, and resilience than any case law. Fiction doesn't just entertain them, it expands their humanity. Another layer of their reading habit is diversity. They don't stick to one genre or one field. They might read a book on neuroscience one week, a novel the next, and an ancient myth after that. On the surface, it looks scattered. But in reality, they're building connections across disciplines. One of the most creative problem solvers I know told me, innovation doesn't come from knowing one field deeply. It comes from connecting fields nobody else is connecting. That's why he reads everything from cooking books to astrophysics. What struck me is how quietly they go about this. Unlike the social media reading culture that thrives on showing off book stacks and reviews, these readers don't announce what they're reading. They don't care if others approve. They don't track books for bragging rights. They simply read, and let the results of their thinking speak for themselves. One mentor of mine has shelves filled with books whose spines are cracked and worn, but when you ask him about them, he'll shrug and say, "It's just what I needed at the time." There's no performance, no pretense, just the pursuit of wisdom. And this pursuit often leads them to books most people overlook. They're not afraid of reading outdated works, forgotten diaries, obscure essays, or niche manuals. In fact, they prefer it. They know that hidden wisdom often lives where nobody else is looking. A friend once showed me an old manual on craftsmanship written in the 1920s and explained how its lessons on patience and precision helped him become a better designer in the digital age. The connection seemed unlikely, until you realize that wisdom doesn't expire. There's also something fascinating about the way they handle unfinished books. Most of us feel guilty if we don't finish a book. But the smartest readers I know don't care about finishing, they care about finding value. If a book gives them one idea that changes how they think, they consider it worth the time, even if they never reach the last page. One friend told me, "I'd rather abandon 10 books after one great idea than finish 100 and remember nothing." As I observed these habits, I began adopting them myself. I slowed down my reading, revisited old books, and stopped chasing trends. I started mixing genres I would have once dismissed. I read philosophy not to sound smart but to think clearer. I read history not for trivia but for patterns. I read fiction not just for escape but for empathy. And slowly, something changed. I began noticing connections I had missed before. I began making decisions with more confidence. I began listening more deeply. And the most surprising part, I became quieter about my reading too. The truth is, loud reading doesn't change you. Quiet reading does. The smartest people I know don't need to announce what they're reading because the results are visible in their lives. Their calm under pressure, their clarity of thought, their ability to solve complex problems, and their empathy toward others all stem from the books they've quietly absorbed. They don't read to show off, they read to transform. And this transformation compounds over time. Quiet reading builds quiet power. It doesn't happen overnight. You might not notice the difference after one book or even 10. But over years, the difference becomes undeniable. While others chase the noise of what's popular, these readers build depth. And when the moment comes to make a critical decision, lead a team, or face adversity, their quiet libraries rise to the surface and guide them. So what are the smartest people I know quietly reading right now? They're reading books that force them to think, to reflect, to see differently. They're reading philosophy for clarity, history for patterns, psychology for self-mastery, science for wonder, and fiction for empathy. They're reading old works, new works, obscure works, and sometimes unfinished works. But most importantly, they're reading not to finish books but to be finished by them. Now ask yourself, what are you quietly reading? Are you filling your time with what's trending, or are you choosing the kind of books that quietly build the mind you want to have in 10 years? Don't wait for the perfect moment. Pick up something challenging, something timeless, something that makes you think harder than you want to. Start today, and read not for the world's approval but for your own transformation. And if this story spoke to you, don't let it fade. Subscribe now, because the journey doesn't end here. Every story I share is designed to bring you closer to the kind of wisdom the smartest people are living by every single day. Quiet reading builds loud results. Start your own library of transformation today.